Welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Joe.
Hi, everyone, and I'm Sunny.
And you've joined us for another deep dive. Well, it's a rigorous, objective analysis of a core strategy, one used by one of the world's most powerful political systems.
Mm-hmm.
We are cracking open the playbook behind who is the enemy, nationalism as the CCP's stability toolkit.
Yeah.
This is a deep exploration, really, of how internal political friction is intentionally redirected, stabilized, and even weaponized outward.
It's absolutely essential, to understand the structure. It dictates so much global interactions, trade policy, domestic life.
Right.
We aren't just looking at, random political rhetoric here. We're examining a deeply institutionalized theoretical framework. It's been in place for decades.
Decades.
And to understand why this strategy works, we really have to start at its very foundation.
Okay, let's lay the historical groundwork then. We need to go back to 1957, to Mao Zedong's seminal work on the correct handling of contradictions among the people.
Right, that essay.
This essay basically provided the blueprint for categorizing and, crucially, for managing every problem society could possibly face. Everything boils down to two simple but, structurally vital buckets. What are they?
Well, the first category is probably the easiest one to govern against: antagonistic contradictions.
Okay.
These are the enemy contradictions. They represent the issues between the people and, the perceived enemies of the state.
Like who, historically?
Historically, you're talking landlords, imperialists, counter-revolutionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And today, it's framed more as, foreign containment forces, like the U.S. and Japan are often portrayed.
So problems with a really clearly identifiable antagonist, someone to point at.
Precisely. And the solution for these issues is non-negotiable. It's final, specialized enforcement.
Right.
They're solved using the means of dictatorship. That's the term used. These contradictions are seen as existential threats that have to be eliminated to protect the system.
So that category is neat, clean, politically safe to address, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Then you have the second category, which is, it's far messier. And it represents the bulk of the daily governance headaches.
Okay, exactly.
And that's the category of non-antagonistic contradictions, the internal contradictions. These are the disagreements, the failings, the stresses that arise among the people themselves.
So real, everyday frustrations.
Yes, we're talking about genuine frustrations. Inefficient bureaucracy, official corruption, maybe at the local level, widening income inequality, the crushing weight of, say, the housing crisis, or just despair over economic anxieties, like the really high youth unemployment we've seen.
Right. And the party can't just use the means of dictatorship against millions of its own citizens who are, legitimately angry that their apartment building hasn't been finished or they can't find a decent job.
No, that would be a guaranteed path to instability.
So what's the official fix for these problems?
Well, the official theoretical solution for non-antagonistic problems is this formula: unity, criticism, unity.
Unity, criticism, unity. How does that work in theory?
In theory, you allow some limited internal criticism. You address the specific policy failure or maybe the corrupt official involved. And then everyone rallies back together under the flag. It's meant to allow the system to flex a bit without breaking.
And here's the picker, right? This is the critical pivot. The engine that drives this whole stability toolkit we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
When those internal problems become overwhelming, when the pressure gauge is just pegged deep in the red, the regime actively avoids that messy, kind of risky process of internal criticism and unity.
Absolutely. That internal valve is just too dangerous to touch sometimes. When the internal steam pressure gets way too high, think about the massive slowdown in property development leading to trillions in debt, or that structural high youth unemployment we saw shoot past 20% in mid-2023.
Yes, scary numbers.
The regime instead executes a strategic maneuver: diversionary politics.
Yeah.
They open the external vent.
Okay, so explain that. Opening the external vent.
It involves the deliberate structural practice of transforming an internal non-antagonistic problem, something within society, into an external antagonistic one, an us versus them problem.
So instead of admitting, hey, we mismanaged the real estate sector, they shift the narrative.
Exactly. The narrative becomes the West is suppressing our economy, and that's causing these difficulties.
Okay. That's the magic trick, then.
That is the magic trick. They take a problem of the party, like a bureaucratic mess or an economic failure, and almost instantaneously reframe it as a national problem against an external enemy.
This move, this strategic reframing, it immediately gives them a threefold payoff for regime consolidation.
I guess. A threefold payoff. It's incredibly effective.
Let's break those down because they really explain why this strategy is so indispensable for them. First, consensus building.
Right. By pointing aggressively at an external boogeyman and a designated enemy, the regime immediately activates this strong sense of patriotism, of nationalism. And this shifts public anger away from, say, the local government official or maybe the central bank, and directs it towards a foreign target, the US, Japan, sometimes Taiwan. It quickly generates this consensus that the primary struggle isn't internal, it's external.
Okay, that makes sense. Second payoff.
The crucial pressure release mechanism.
Pressure release.
Instead of all that frustration bubbling up into, organized political dissent, things like protests, large-scale strikes, which are obviously dangerous for the regime, they offer an officially approved, non-threatening target for that rage.
So you're furious about losing your deposit on an apartment.
Exactly. But instead of protesting the developer or the local government, you're encouraged, maybe implicitly or explicitly, to vent that anger by, say, organizing a boycott of Japanese electronics or launching aggressive online campaigns against foreign critics.
The energy gets released, but the system itself remains untouched.
Clever.
Oh. Very. And the third payoff is really the ultimate prize, regime consolidation.
How does that work? This strategy perpetually reinforces the core narrative that only the ruling party, the indispensable leadership, can successfully guide and protect the nation against this constant, perpetual foreign suppression and exploitation.
So by constantly manufacturing the external enemy.
They bind the party's survival directly to the nation's survival. It makes dissent seem not just like disagreeing with policy, but like national betrayal.
Okay, so if this framework is structural, the party needs to maintain a target list, right? Constantly refreshed, but also historically grounded.
Absolutely. And the foundation upon which basically every modern grievance rests is the century of humiliation narrative.
Tell us about that, the century of humiliation.
This is critical. Official history education, state textbooks, historical documentaries, state media coverage, they focus relentlessly on the period from roughly 1840 to 1949.
Okay, starting with the First Opium War.
Exactly. This whole era is portrayed as a century of continuous, devastating oppression by foreign powers, specifically the Western colonial powers, and perhaps most intensely, Imperial Japan.
And this history isn't just, taught in a dusty textbook. It's activated.
Oh, absolutely. It's actively linked to modern economic struggles, diplomatic disputes. It effectively frames current trade issues or technology battles as just the newest chapter in this long 170-year campaign by Western imperialists trying to keep China down.
Wow. So the goal is to establish this default setting of victimhood and distrust towards the West.
Precisely. So that any negative economic event, no matter what the internal cause might actually be, can be immediately attributed to foreign malevolence, foreign interference.
Okay, so let's look at how they deploy this against specific enemies. You mentioned Japan earlier.
Right. Japan carries arguably the heaviest historical baggage in this narrative. The focus is constantly dragged back to World War II atrocities, the Nanjing Massacre being the most prominent example. This serves as the emotional bedrock, really, of anti-foreign sentiment, especially anti-Japanese sentiment.
And this historical debt, as you called it, gets cashed in whenever there's a contemporary dispute.
Instantly. Think about the tensions over the Senkaku-Ryoyu Islands. Those aren't framed just as, simple territorial disputes. They're presented as aggressive Japanese revanchism, a return to militarism.
Or that Fukushima nuclear water discharge in 2023.
Yeah.
That blew up.
Oh, that was a perfect modern case study of this conversion process. State media amplified the concerns way out of proportion, triggering widespread fear, hostility.
Right. I remember seeing reports of massive boycotts of Japanese seafood, disruptions to Japanese businesses in China, intense online harassment.
Exactly. And this was despite international bodies like the IAEA clearing the discharge process. It was a perfect low-cost way for the state to redirect national anxiety simmering from, economic issues onto an external target.
Okay, so Japan is the historical debt. What about the West, particularly the U.S.?
So moving from historical debt to contemporary containment, the second and arguably most important target today is the West, and specifically the United States.
And how are they framed? Not as invaders anymore, presumably.
No, they're framed as the active architects of modern containment. The idea pushed is that they are deliberately trying to prevent China's great rejuvenation, its rise on the world stage.
The narrative is a Western conspiracy to suppress China's development.
That's the line, yes. And it provides a convenient explanation for almost everything. Economic friction, diplomatic disagreements.
Like what specifically? Give us some examples.
Well, the trade wars initiated under Trump, for instance, the technology restrictions placed on companies like Huawei, diplomatic tensions over the South China Sea, even Western comments or reports regarding human rights issues in places like Xinjiang.
All bundled together.
All neatly bundled and presented as concerted acts of aggression, designed specifically to kneecap the nation's progress, to hold China back.
And does this work? Does the population buy into this narrative?
The data suggests it's highly effective internally. Our analysis confirms this. You mentioned peer research earlier, that 2020 data showing over 70% of Chinese respondents viewing the U.S. negatively. That aligns perfectly with the official, decades-long promotion of this containment narrative.
Wow, 70%. That's significant buy-in.
It really is. Decades of messaging pays off.
Okay, so Japan, the U.S., and the West. What about Taiwan? That seems like a special case.
It is. Taiwan is the hybrid enemy. It's simultaneously presented as an internal political issue, a breakaway province, and also as potentially the most dangerous external threat because the constant framing around foreign interference, mainly U.S. interference.
So internal problem, external cause.
That's the official position, meticulously framed. Taiwan is driven by secessionist forces who are fundamentally betraying the nation. But, and this is key, they ensure that these internal forces are always linked to external puppeteers, namely the U.S.
So it becomes an internal target that's made safer to attack because it's positioned as a proxy for the real external adversary.
Precisely. It externalizes the internal conflict. And the intense reaction to Nancy Pelosi's visit in 2022 perfectly showcased this tactic in action.
Right, the military exercises, the online rage.
Exactly. The large-scale military drills, the absolute flood of nationalistic rage on social media, it all reinforced the state narrative. That Taiwan isn't just independent-minded, but it's actively forgetting its roots.
Yeah.
And being used as a weapon, as a pawn by foreign powers to undermine China's national unity.
So it's a perfect convergence of that century of humiliation narrative and the current perceived threat of containment.
Textbook execution of the strategy.
Okay, we've established the theory, the playbook, and the main targets. Now let's really connect the operational dots. How does the regime use this toolkit in real time to mask real severe internal crises? Because the 2020s, they've been a pressure cooker internally, right? Much worse than many observers maybe anticipate.
Absolutely. Leading into, say, 2025 and 2026, the severity of those people's internal contradictions, as Mao called them, really reached a breaking point. We're talking deep systemic issues, like the, near total collapse of the real estate sector, which represents a huge chunk of household wealth in China. Local governments drowning in debt, threatening a wider fiscal meltdown, and of course that chronic, historically high youth unemployment.
Yeah, when that 16 to 24 age group unemployment figure went over 20% in 2023.
They just stopped reporting it.
Right. They just stopped publishing the number, which signals just how dangerous they felt that number had become for internal stability.
Exactly. That kind of widespread economic anxiety, job insecurity, life savings potentially wiped out, that's a huge political risk for any government.
And according to the Maoist playbook we discussed, instead of engaging in painful internal criticism and maybe actual reform,
the media executes an immediate, almost universal propaganda shift.
Towards
the outside. The media focuses almost exclusively on the complex and severe external environment. The messaging becomes uniform across state channels. If you're worried about finding a job or if your property investment is suddenly underwater, the fault lies not with, local planners or failed central policies.
But with
Western decoupling, suppression, and containment. It's their fault.
It really is the ultimate convenient scapegoat, isn't it?
It is. But crucially, this maneuver isn't some new invention for the 2020s. It has a deep historical lineage. This is the operational standard practiced for decades.
Okay, let's look at some earlier precedents then. Where did this start?
Well, you can trace this practice back to the very early days of the People's Republic. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 was arguably the first major test case.
How so? What was happening internally then?
Internally, the brand new regime was really struggling. Major challenges with things like land reform, consolidating power, stabilizing the economy after years of war.
So they initiated the Resist America, Aid Korea, Defend the Homeland campaign.
Which was, politically speaking, a masterstroke of diversionary politics.
Why?
By creating an immediate, visible, and highly emotional external conflict against the perceived imperialist aggressor, the U.S., they instantly shifted national attention away from all the domestic hardship and struggle.
And used the patriotism.
Exactly. They used the ensuing patriotic unity to consolidate the party's authority over the newly established government. Rallying against the external enemy solidified internal control.
Okay, that makes sense. Where else have we seen this? Maybe more recently.
A similar, really crucial application came after the events of 1989, Tiananmen Square.
Right. Western countries imposed sanctions afterwards. The regime was facing severe internal political criticism and international condemnation.
Yes. And those sanctions were immediately framed not as consequences for the government's internal actions, but as malicious plots. Plots orchestrated by Western anti-China forces.
Designed to
stop China's rise, to keep it weak. This narrative successfully diverted a lot of domestic attention away from the political repression itself, and instead fueled a surge in nationalism, uniting much of the populace against the external perceived threat to China's sovereignty.
So this strategy has evolved, right? It seems more progressive now, into what people call the wolf warrior era.
That's right. Starting roughly in the 2010s and really escalating throughout the 2020s. This is characterized by an aggressive, constant diplomatic and media posture designed to ensure there's almost permanent friction with the U.S., the West, and Japan.
But why court friction?
Yeah.
Isn't stability the goal?
The aggression is intentional because external friction is necessary in this model to mask or distract from internal issues. Stability is the goal, but friction is the tool. Look at the pandemic response. When the regime faced heavy international criticism and even some rare domestic pressure over the initial handling of the COVID-19 outbreak, official media went into overdrive. They successfully deflected blame by aggressively promoting conspiracy theories suggesting the U.S. military was the origin of the virus.
Turning a public health crisis
into an external military conspiracy narrative. It shifted the focus entirely.
It's the constant misdirection. Look over there. Look at the angry foreigner. Don't look at the mountains of local government debt piling up or the fact that nobody's spending money because they're scared.
Precisely. The internal illness is systematically ignored or downplayed, while the external cure doses of nationalistic rage and victimhood is administered daily through state media and education.
What makes this stability toolkit so powerful, it seems, is that it's not just reliant on individual political figures making speeches, it's structural.
That's exactly right. The enemy creation mindset is institutionalized. It's built directly into the mechanisms of the state, particularly education, the media, and even security apparatuses.
Can you give us a concrete example of that institutionalization?
Well, the most recent major example is the 2023 Patriotic Education Law.
Okay, what does that do?
This is more than just like a suggestion or a guideline. It legally mandates the promotion of patriotism in schools, in companies, across society. And critically, this patriotism is very specifically defined.
Defined how?
It's defined by emphasizing historical humiliation, that a century of humiliation again, and the perpetual threat posed by external forces trying to hold China back. That's the core of the mandatory patriotism.
And this creates a weird dynamic in the education system, right? Something you mentioned about better students believing it more.
It creates a fascinating, dark paradox, especially among highly ambitious students. It's not necessarily about naive intellectual acceptance of the narrative. It's often about strategic success within a highly politicized system.
Okay, pull that apart for us. Why would someone who's highly intelligent, aiming for top universities, internalize and repeat these viewpoints, even if they might have doubts?
It's often a matter of professional survival and advancement. For those critical gatekeeping exams, the Gaokao, which is the National University Entrance Exam, or the Zongkao for high school entry, political alignment is either implicitly or sometimes explicitly graded.
Really? Graded?
Yes. The correct political narrative, the idea that the party rescued the nation from humiliation, that foreign powers are constantly trying to suppress its rise, this becomes the standard answer in politics or history sections.
So you have to repeat it to score well.
You essentially have to repeat this view, demonstrate loyalty to this narrative, to achieve the academic excellence needed to gain entry into elite universities, and later, good jobs, especially within the state sector. It binds academic achievement directly to political conformity.
So nationalism isn't just a belief system. It's almost like a necessary professional credential in that context.
In many ways, yes. Beyond education, the state also employs a very systematic, strategic framework for narrative control. It's known as the Three Wars strategy.
Three wars. What are they?
The Three Wars, or Sanzan in Chinese strategy, is a doctrine used primarily by the military, the PLA, but also influential across the state apparatus. It defines narrative control not as just, PR or publicity,
But
as a critical strategic tool, a component of national defense on par with traditional military capabilities. The three components are public opinion warfare, psychological warfare, and legal warfare.
Okay, let's break those down. Public opinion warfare seems straightforward, controlling the media narrative.
That's the most visible part, yes. It involves controlling domestic media, censoring online discourse, preventing alternative views from spreading, and also flooding international platforms with official narratives and perspectives. The goal is to set the terms of the debate, both inside China and increasingly outside, ensuring the official version of events, especially those related to external threats or conflicts, is the dominant one people hear.
Okay, what about psychological warfare? That sounds more insidious.
Psychological warfare, or Sinlizan, is aimed at influencing the morale, the perceptions, and the decision-making of the adversary.
And who's the adversary in this context?
It can be foreign politicians, foreign populations, specific diaspora communities, or even domestic critics. The goal is often to demoralize them, to sow doubt, or to convince them of the inevitability of China's success and the futility of opposing it. It plays heavily into narratives of historical destiny, national strength, and perceived foreign weakness or decadence.
And the third one, legal warfare.
Legal warfare, Falujan, involves leveraging international law, domestic law, treaties, courts, and international organizations like the UN or the WTO to legitimize China's own actions and claims, while simultaneously delegitimizing the claims or criticisms of adversaries.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Aggressively using specific interpretations of historical treaties or international maritime law to assert territorial claims in the South China Sea, for instance. Or deploying complex legal arguments within international bodies to frame foreign human rights criticism as interference in internal affairs, using the language of sovereignty as a legal shield.
Wow. This really underscores that the propaganda, the constant repetition of the external enemy narrative, isn't accidental or haphazard. It's a calculated, multifaceted national security strategy.
Absolutely. It's doctrine.
And you mentioned this structure crosses borders, creating a transnational echo chamber.
Yes, and this helps explain that paradox we sometimes see. Overseas Chinese students or recent migrants who maintain this intense, sometimes quite aggressive nationalism despite living in the very Western countries they are taught to distrust.
Even though they're outside the Great Firewall, physically.
Exactly. They might have access to free media, but they often choose to remain enclosed within an information island, consuming news and interacting primarily within specific digital ecosystems.
How is that island maintained when they're abroad?
Primarily through Chinese language digital platforms. Think WeChat, which is ubiquitous for communication and news via public accounts. Also, specific Chinese news apps, social media like Weibo, if they still use it, or even local Chinese language news outlets abroad that often echo state narratives.
So they stay plugged into the domestic information flow.
They effectively stay plugged into the domestic, state-approved nationalist narratives, often unfiltered by critical perspectives from local foreign media. The consequence is that this strong national identity, constantly fueled by the victimhood narrative and the external threat narrative, makes it incredibly easy for individuals within these communities to criticize, ostracize, or sometimes even report peers who express differing political views, labeling them as unpatriotic or brainwashed by the West.
So the system becomes self-policing, even when it extends globally.
It's remarkably effective at being self-policing, yes. The social pressure within the diaspora can be intense.
This brings us to maybe the deepest layer of this whole strategy, the psychological defense mechanism. The state builds the narrative, manufactures the enemy, but it seems the individual often constructs the firewall inside their own head to maintain it.
That phenomenon is really a textbook case of cognitive dissonance.
Explain that.
Okay, imagine an individual who has invested their entire identity, their sense of self, their pride, maybe their academic success, their family loyalty, into the core belief that the party is the indispensable protector of the nation. the savior from humiliation.
Right, a very deeply held belief.
Very deep. Then perhaps they go abroad or even just access less restricted information online, and they encounter credible evidence that contradicts this core belief. Maybe evidence of significant economic mismanagement, political repression they weren't aware of, or historical abuses committed by the party itself.
That creates a clash of discomfort.
It creates severe psychological discomfort. Cognitive dissonance. The brain doesn't like holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, and it's often psychologically easier, less painful for the brain to reject the new challenging information rather than question the deeply held identity-forming core belief.
So you find ways to dismiss the uncomfortable facts.
Absolutely. To resolve that intense dissonance, the immediate avoidance strategy often kicks in. It's far less psychically taxing to instantaneously dismiss the contradictory evidence as anti-China propaganda, biased Western media, or simply fake news than it is to engage in the agonizing, potentially identity-shattering process of questioning those foundational beliefs about the party and the state that you've held your whole life.
And technology, you're saying, has basically weaponized this personal bias, created what you call the algorithmic cage or the mobile firewall.
Yeah, think about it this way. Even if someone overseas has theoretical access to Google, YouTube, BBC, New York Times, where do they actually spend their digital time?
Often on Chinese platforms.
Very often. They might spend hours scrolling through Chinese language versions of TikTok, Douyin, or international TikTok focused on Chinese content, Xiaohongshu, Little Red Book, or specific Chinese news apps and WeChat groups.
And the algorithms on those platforms
are designed to maximize engagement. They learn what you like, what confirms your existing views, and they continuously push more of that content to you. This effectively creates a personalized, transnational echo chamber.
A mobile firewall you carry in your pocket.
Exactly. They are, in effect, choosing to live within a self-imposed information bubble, even when the technical barriers of the Great Firewall are removed. The state built the original wall, but the user often carries and reinforces a mobile version, actively maintaining that default setting of enmity or suspicion towards the outside.
And this is compounded by what you called an identity crisis, the fear of changing your mind.
Yes, because rejecting the official narrative, questioning those core beliefs, comes with a massive, often tangible emotional and social cost.
Like what?
It means potentially abandoning the identity you've acquired. Maybe the identity of being a righteous defender of the nation against foreign bullies. It risks alienating you from family back home who might hold those beliefs very strongly. It risks isolating you from your diaspora community abroad, where shared nationalism can be a key bonding element.
The fear of being seen as a traitor or Haingian.
That fear is incredibly powerful. It acts as a potent suppressant against entertaining alternative viewpoints or engaging in genuine critical thinking about the official narratives. The social cost is just too high for many.
And we sometimes see the outward manifestation of this intense psychological defense in what gets stereotyped as confrontational behavior, right? The angry patriot online, or sometimes even in person.
Right. That behavior, whether it's aggressive online harassment over Taiwan or historical issues, or very visible, sometimes disruptive displays of nationalism in foreign cities, is often a defense mechanism.
Yeah, also.
It's triggered when their core identity, which they often equate directly with the nation and the party's narrative about the nation, feels threatened or challenged. When they perceive an insult or a challenge to the party's authority or its version of history, they lash out. They aggressively reinforce the external enemy narrative because, psychologically, they need to believe it to maintain their own internal stability and sense of self.
So if direct confrontation, arguing with them, presenting counter-evidence, often just triggers these deeper defense mechanisms, makes them double down because it confirms their belief that the West is hostile. How do you even begin to counter this pervasive mindset?
Well, the path, according to the analysis, is somewhat counterintuitive. It's probably not about winning an argument head-on.
Okay.
It seems to be more about promoting genuine, positive cultural exchange, direct, non-confrontational personal exposure through things like unbiased tourism, if possible, educational exchanges, professional collaborations where people work together on common goals.
Maybe a different kind of communication.
And using gentle, perhaps Socratic, critical thinking methods, asking questions rather than making accusations, guiding them towards their own realization that the world and their country's situation might be more complex, more nuanced than the simple standard answer they've been taught.
Fostering an internal realization rather than trying to force an external defeat in an argument.
Exactly, because forcing it often just strengthens the firewall.
Okay, this whole structural dependency on manufacturing enemies, on diversionary tactics. It forces us, I think, to ask the ultimate, maybe provocative question of this deep dive.
Yeah.
If the regime is so incredibly skilled at creating and pointing fingers at external antagonists, who or what is the real threat to the Chinese people themselves?
Well, looking at it from an objective, nonpartisan, international perspective, based purely on historical impact and current realities, the greatest existential threat to the Chinese people has historically been, and arguably remains, the actions and policies of the regime itself, rather than the various foreign enemies it constantly points toward.
That's a very stark assessment. But you're saying the historical evidence backs that up.
The historical evidence for the scale of the internal threat seems overwhelmingly clear. Frankly, you absolutely have to look at the human cost of internal political campaigns and policy failures. We're talking about the estimated tens of millions who perished during the Great Famine, between roughly 1959 and 1962. Those deaths weren't caused by foreign invasion. They were the result of catastrophic internal policy failures during the Great Leap Forward.
Right.
We remember the years of intense societal chaos, the violence, the destruction of cultural heritage, the lost generation during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. Again, an internal catastrophe.
And more recently.
And in the contemporary sense, you have the ongoing systemic oppression against political dissidents, the continuous persecution of religious groups that fall outside party control, like the documented suppression and closure of house churches like the Zion Church, and of course the widely reported systematic human rights violations against ethnic minorities in regions like Xinjiang.
These weren't foreign attacks. These were, as you said, self-inflicted wounds, often on a massive scale.
Exactly. Inflicted by the state upon its own population.
So this structural enemy manufacturing tactic, the constant diversion, it serves one crucial purpose above all.
It serves the singular crucial purpose of obscuring these internal systemic failures. Failures which are often the actual source of instability, suffering, and anxiety for the average person. It's the ultimate deflection shield.
So when economic stagnation hits hard,
you don't have a national debate about the inefficiencies of the state-owned enterprise sector or the systemic risks of massive local government debt fueled by unsustainable infrastructure spending. No. You instantly blame U.S. containment policies or Western decoupling.
The structural problems, economic, social, political, they just get kicked down the road.
They're left largely unresolved, festering under the surface because pointing the finger outward is always politically safer and more immediately unifying for the regime than conducting painful, potentially destabilizing internal reform that might challenge vested interests or admit past mistakes.
But what's the long-term risk of relying so heavily on this strategy? I mean, it seems pretty effective for short-term political stability, keeping a lid on things.
Yeah.
But what are the consequences down the road? What's the bill that eventually comes due?
The analysis suggests this reliance on manufactured external crises leads to at least three major long-term risks. First, you get increasing international isolation.
How so?
That constant aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy, the boycotts, the trade retaliation. It damages diplomatic ties, erodes trust, and has measurable negative economic impacts. We saw tangible examples with trade restrictions and bans hurting specific sectors after incidents like the Fukushima discharge response. Businesses become wary.
Okay, isolation. What's the second risk?
Second, the internal structural problems are left unresolved. They don't go away just because you blame foreigners. The massive debt bomb, the demographic challenges of an aging population and low birth rate, the unresolved housing crisis, the environmental degradation, all of these only accumulate, arguably guaranteeing a far larger, more complex, and unavoidable crisis later on. You're just delaying the inevitable reckoning.
And the third risk. You mentioned it might be the most tragic.
It is perhaps the human cost in terms of worldview. It's the creation of potentially generations of young people who grow up with these deep cognitive biases ingrained from childhood. An entrenched victimhood narrative combined with intense nationalism, leading to a fundamentally distorted view of global political reality.
And that
makes genuine international understanding, cooperation, or constructive diplomacy exponentially harder in the future. It creates populations conditioned for conflict, not collaboration.
So the path out of this structural trap, this cycle of enemy creation, it really has to begin with individual self-reflection, doesn't it?
It seems it has to. The fundamental shift requires individuals, particularly those educated within the system, those who have maybe benefited from following the prescribed narratives, to stop, pause, and question the standard answer they were taught.
To ask themselves
The simple but incredibly powerful and maybe even terrifying question, Why do I feel this specific way about the world, about these other countries? Is it based on objective reality, or is it based on what I was conditioned to believe? What if the truth is far more complex, far more nuanced than the black and white official narrative suggests?
That critical self-doubt.
That flicker of critical self-doubt is potentially the only thing that can begin to crack the wall of that psychological firewall we talked about.
The power of independent thought. Perhaps the one thing this entire structural stability toolkit is ultimately designed to suppress or eliminate.
Understanding this toolkit, how it functions, why it persists, it's absolutely essential for anyone trying to navigate or understand this incredibly complex geopolitical landscape we live in today.
Well, we truly appreciate you joining us for this really intense deep dive today. Thank you, as always, for thinking critically with us.
And we really encourage you, the listener, to keep mulling over these strategies. Ask yourself, who benefits most when public anger is consistently directed outward, away from domestic problems?
Indeed. And as always, make sure you subscribe for more detailed breakdowns like this one.
And hey, don't forget to check out our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickytolife, M-I-C-K-Y to life.
Yeah, Mickey's got some really fun memes, great spirits-tasting vlogs if you're into that, and some cool travel content too. Definitely a much-needed break from all this heavy geopolitical tension sometimes.
For sure.
We'll see you next time.